What's going on, everyone? Today, me and my boy Damon are going to recap Last of Us Episode 2. We had done a recap for Episode 1, but HBO was blocking the upload. So right now, unfortunately, that's not up. But I'm going back and changing the clips and whatnot to make it so that HBO isn't going to block everything because we had an exciting episode for you guys to listen to. But with that being said, Damon, any initial thoughts before we get into this recap for Episode 2?
Chen, very sad that we were taken down by the HBO Illuminati, but we will be back with more to give you. Don't you guys worry. My initial thoughts for this episode 2, I think we've reached the point now where everyone's obviously noticed the Walking Dead parallels, and they're kind of waiting for it to become more than that and to kind of grow. And based on the hype around the video game and what everybody from that community has to say, I feel like it was kind of going to happen at any moment, and we started to see it deliver this time around.
Yeah, that is interesting. We do want to see what is a little bit different about it this time around. But so far, it has followed similar parallels, but still pretty good. But let's get into it. So we open up this time in Jakarta, Indonesia. It's September 24th, 2003, which is 2 days before the scenes from episode 1 when we saw Sarah, Joel, and Tommy in Austin, Texas. There's an older woman eating at a restaurant when all of a sudden a few police officers show up and escort her away. As they're driving along in the car, we find out more information about the woman. Her name is Ibu Ratna, professor of mycology at the University of Indonesia. She's not in any trouble, but the officers need her help on something urgent, so they bring her to the hospital. We then cut to the hospital where it seems like business as usual at first. The officers seem very spooked, and the professor starts to sense that something is going wrong. They escort her to a highly secure section of the hospital where an older police officer asks her to study the Orpheocordyceps fungus under a microscope. The professor is puzzled at first because cordyceps typically cannot survive in humans, but the officer grimly says nothing and then leads her to an observation room where we see a dead woman's body laid on the table. In a very disgusting scene, the professor then examines the corpse, discovers a bite on the woman's leg as well as bullet hole in her forehead. She cuts open the flesh and sees signs of fungal infection. Then she inspects the woman's mouth, pulls out the tentacles of the cordyceps fungus. I'm just going to call them tentacles. It's alive and moving, and the professor is so spooked that she drops her tools and sprints out of the containment room. We then cut to a room where the professor is sitting on the couch looking terrified. The police officer explains that this all started 30 hours ago on a flour and grain factory on the west side of the city. Apparently, grain is the perfect way for the fungus to grow and spread. The woman was usually normal, but suddenly attacked 4 coworkers and bit 3 of them. When the police came, she tried to attack them and was shot in the head. The 3 coworkers that were bitten were initially held for observation, but then they too became frenzied and the police officers had to kill them. The professor then asks who bit the woman, and the officer doesn't know. We then find out that 14 factory workers are also missing. Holy shit. At this point, the professor is visibly shaking, and she has to put her tea on the table. The officer asks the professor to help them discover a cure, a vaccine. Damon, anything to help. She calmly replies that there's nothing they can do. Their best course of action is to bomb the entire city. The scene ends with her tearfully asking to be driven home so that she can spend her final moments with family. Crazy intro scene of episode 2. What did you think?
My initial thought was when the cop first pulls up, this lady's done. She's getting executed right now. They think she's infected somehow because if this show's taught you one thing, it's don't trust a man in a uniform. But it turned out to be a little bit of a different scenario. So I'm kind of the reference king when it comes to all these nerdy sci-fi parallels. So I just want to say similar shot to a scene in Annihilation, actually, when they're investigating like the actual substance itself. And they're trying to see what the infection holds with it. It really strikes a sinister tone that a horrifying realization has dawned on her as she's like an expert scientist and she seems pretty shaken by this constantly. It strikes that sinister tone that we sort of had a preview of in episode 1. There's something about those freaky mushroom tentacles growing in real time that just like sends a shiver down your back. Like, I don't know what it is, like creepy as fuck. But the perfect substrate comment brought me back to like 7th grade biology when you're thinking about like your old school labs here. But it seems like the cordyceps are they've described to you the origin story of them essentially, which also ties into the intro from last episode where the scientists are offering their conjecture in the talk show about what could the perfect substrate be. Well, we found out what it is. And yeah, there's no way they're getting out of this with a vaccine or medicine of any kind. Tremendous acting job by her. We probably won't see her much more just based on the pretext of what she said and what we're seeing here. But this is also where we come back to our old friend Chernobyl from HBO. The vibe when everything's first starting to go down and everybody sees the radiation in the air. That's the same vibe that I'm getting right now.
Yeah, I 100% agree on that. But we now cut to present day where we're back in Boston, and the trio of Joel, Tess, and Ellie have spent their first night outside of the quarantine zone in Boston. Ellie is just waking up when she sees both Joel and Tess just grilling her. Clearly, they are worried about her potentially being infected. Joel has a gun pointed to her the entire time. They check her arm again, and Ellie seems fine. Ellie then reveals that Marlene found her after she was bitten. Marlene had the Fireflies test her every single day by having her hold her hand out and count to 10. Joel and Tess disagree about Ellie's potential immunity. Joel still thinks she's going to be infected, and he wants to bring her back to the quarantine zone. Tess disagrees and thinks that she's legit. The trio then start eating some food, and we get this funny scene where Joel and Tess are eating gross beef jerky. It looks very dry, while Ellie pulls out a fat chicken sandwich. Tess asks Ellie why Marlene thinks of her as super important. Ellie reveals that there is a Firefly base camp out west with doctors who are working on the cure. Ellie's potential immunity is the key. Joel doesn't think any of it will work. Tess convinces Joel to finish the mission and bring Ellie to the Fireflies outside of the old statehouse. The trio then leave their little shelter and set off into the open city. So, Damon, what did you think about that first shot? We're out of the QZ for the first time, but we're still in Boston.
It's always sad making your way out of Boston, but I would say that this scene does some great character work for us, shows us that Tess does have some humanity to her, right? She comes off as softer than Joel here. There is the comment about, well, he kind of wants to shoot you. So, maybe you play along with us and actually kind of listen to us and go through with this. Joel seems pretty disillusioned with the whole theory of, she could be the cure, this could be it. But he's also kind of a bitter dude after all that he's been through. He's pretty jaded, can't blame him. But it's going to take a little more softening up for our guy Joel to really come together with his plan.
Yeah, I agree with that. Tess does display the softer side, and she's more of a negotiator. So we're now in the open city, and we see spectacular views of the wreckage in Boston. Most of the cities were bombed in order to slow the spread of infection. It's a 10-minute walk to the statehouse. They trek along Boston. I think it's around I-90, actually, when Ellie then tells Joel and Tess how she got bit. She went alone to explore the abandoned mall in the QZ and got bit by an infected. Tess finds out that Ellie is only 14 and she's impressed by the balls on her. The city is eerily quiet and you can hear some distant screams of the infected. The trio eventually have to cross through this disgusting pool of water in a wrecked hotel. We actually see some wildlife enjoying themselves, which is a nice juxtaposition with the humans just kind of suffering. And as Ellie goes to explore the front desk, she gets surprised by a corpse. Joel has to begrudgingly pull her out. They get to the top of the hotel to try and scope out the statehouse and see if it's safe. Ellie and Joel finally get this moment where they kind of bond a little bit, but they're still being assholes to each other. We learn that the infected typically last for a month or two, but some can live for 20 years. The trio then get to the top floor of the hotel where we see a shot of the famous Faneuil Hall in Boston. There are swarms of infected crawling on the ground, essentially blocking their path to the statehouse. We learn that the infected are connected. Because the fungus grows underground, if you step on a patch of cordyceps in one place, you can wake up a dozen of infected from somewhere else, and they all head your way. Joel then suggests that they have to go through this museum in order to avoid the infected. So what do you think about that scene right there?
I really liked how this scene brought a lot of context and storytelling to what we've already noticed previously, but maybe weren't 100% on. For example, the bombing of the cities. It was kind of interesting when all the shit was going down in Austin, when it seemed like pandemonium was breaking out. And we start to realize that basically most government's responses when a highly populated area had cordyceps was bomb the fuck out of it, right? Which is kind of the American way. So it makes sense. I would also say that the commotion and the pandemonium from before makes a lot more sense. But I love to know how things work. Anytime you get in sci-fi, you want to know how the big boss works. You want to know what makes it tick. Keep a little bit shrouded in mystery. But getting pieced together, the cordyceps have more powers than simply just infecting a bunch of people in a zombie-like way, makes this differentiated. I like it a lot.
Yeah, good points there. So now we're walking through the Boston Museum. They walk inside. It's dark. They have to have flashlights. It's called the Bostonian Museum, which is actually a fictional museum, but it's been inspired by real museums in Boston. Inside the museum, Ellie discovers a dead man who looks to be recently killed. It's now clear that they're probably infected inside the building because the corpse is relatively fresh. The trio has to be on high guard. Tess and Joel are visibly spooked, and Joel says they must now be completely silent as they walk through the museum. The trio go up the stairs and see more evidence of cordyceps everywhere. It's eerie and just a bit too quiet. They get to the top floor and part of the museum caves in, but fortunately all three are unscathed. All of a sudden they hear the screams of an infected nearby. Now here's the thing, the infected can't see, but they have an incredible sense of hearing. So the infected enters the room and the trio try and stay as silent as possible, hoping to wait it out. We see the infected stumble out and Ellie gasps, which is enough to give up their position. We get a close-up look of the infected and it's mostly like a giant brain with rotting teeth. It's absolutely nasty. Joel immediately unleashes gunfire and all of a sudden we're in a battle. The infected eats the gunfire to the body and jumps on Joel, who somehow fights to fend it off. Meanwhile, another infected runs into the room and Tess grabs Ellie and they run for it. Remember, you cannot get bit. Tess and Ellie get separated, and the second infected chases Tess as she runs and returns gunfire. Ellie is crawling, trying to find a hiding spot. Meanwhile, Joel has an infected chasing him, and he purposefully causes more noise to try and throw it off. It works for an instant, and we get this tense scene where Joel is hiding behind a glass cabinet, trying to reload his gun as quietly as possible. Joel finds Ellie hiding in a corner, and while they try and quietly escape, or not a corner, she was just hiding behind this table, but while they try and quietly escape, Joel ends up stepping on a piece of glass, which gives away their position. The infected immediately jumps on Joel and Ellie, and Joel tries his hardest to fight it off and avoid being bitten. Thank God for elite fucking plot armor. Joel fires enough shots to get the infected off, and then he has to finish him off with a flurry of headshots. Elite shit. We see the other infected sprint over, and Tess comes out of nowhere and catches it with an axe. As the infected is struggling, Joel finds his rifle and puts a few more bullets into its head. The trio survive, but Tess has twisted her ankle. Ellie has been bitten again in the same arm, which is kind of funny, but we know Ellie is immune, so she'll be all right. They finally crawl out of the window onto the roof. Joel and Tess get into a tense little argument where Tess tells Joel not to be a dickhead and actually have hope for once. They cross this wooden plank towards another building, and we finish with Tess looking a little bit tense, so keep that in mind. The trio then use a ladder and get back to the ground floor. End of the fucking scene. What'd you think about that entire battle?
We kind of get the idea that Ellie, although is a tough kid, does have a little more fear of death in her than either Tess or Joel do, just based on life experience, which I think is interesting. We also see that Ellie and Tess have become a little more close over this episode. They seem to have that kind of camaraderie going, like you mentioned earlier. But at the same time, it's great to know that the cordyceps have a weakness. They simply can't see when they get to a certain level, which does kind of tie in with their erratic movements. This, to me, kind of brings up an interesting point, and I think it's one that will probably unfold if this show gets a long run. It seems like the video game is super influential. Came out in 2013, so much so that a lot of the stuff that came out in the mid-2010s actually bears resemblance to it, plot-wise. People are going to say that the show, if they're not knowing it came from a video game, may have copied these things, but in reality, I think they copied the show in some indirect way, right? Everything has influence in the sci-fi community, so I'm not surprised. But like A Quiet Place, right? And then Annihilation, like I mentioned before. There's some huge similarities here that, I mean, bear kind of some resemblance. But I do think that, in general, the game had to be this influential because I had no clue that these many similarities would pop up, really. I also think that there's this whole sort of reanimation of the cordyceps, kind of Majin Buu style, that's also pretty damn freaky. That's definitely going to come up again. You know it's going to come up again. We also get a sense that we're kind of heading for something dark.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So now the trio are, they're walking to the statehouse and Tess looks grim and Joel seems concerned. The Fireflies were supposed to be waiting for them, but there are no signs of them anywhere. The Firefly truck in front of the building is completely abandoned, which is quite ominous. They enter the building and see all the Firefly members dead as fuck, which is something Damon just said, which is we're heading towards a dark ending. One of them got bit and they all fought each other and everyone died. There's ammo and supplies everywhere in the building. Tess is losing her mind and starting to freak out. Joel wants to return to the QZ, but Tess insists on staying. Tess's behavior all of a sudden has Ellie realizing that Tess has been bitten, hence her change in demeanor and heightened sense of urgency. During the fight in the museum, Tess must have gotten caught by one of the infected and had to fight it off. Tess shows her wound and compares it to Ellie's wound. The difference is significant. Tess's wound is getting worse while Ellie's is healing rapidly. Clearly, Ellie's immunity is real. Tess begs Joel to take Ellie to Bill and Frank. Joel is against the idea at first, but Tess tells him to shut the fuck up and do it. I love Tess. One of the dead fireflies wakes up and Joel puts a bullet in his head. However, the movement and commotion results in the cordyceps fungus communicating, and soon all of the infected throughout the city start rushing towards the old statehouse. The trio is running out of time. What did you think about that?
Some great Tess lines here, which, fitting, as it seems like she might be coming to an end. Think for once we might possibly win. Joe, she's fucking real. Like, she brought some heat in here to really show that, the sense of urgency coming out. I thought one line that really stuck out to me before we see the grand finale is save who you can save, right? Sounds corny on the surface, but this becomes more relevant, especially as the episode winds up, and I wouldn't be surprised if it has bearing on the rest of the season as well. As you know, they're going to be getting into way deeper shit than this.
So now we get to the final scene of the entire episode. Joel takes a peek outside the building and he sees the mob of infected running towards them. We don't actually get to see what the mob looks like running. We just see Joel look in horror. He says they have about a minute to escape. Tess immediately gets to work, knocking over the canisters of gasoline and spilling it all throughout the building floor. She begs Joel, like you had just mentioned earlier, to save who he can save. We see Joel pause for a second to process the situation. Then he grabs Ellie's hand and sprints out. Ellie doesn't want to leave Tess, but Joel drags her away anyways. Tess is now alone in the building and terrified. The hordes of infected storm the building, and Tess backs into a column and pulls out a lighter. The fungus is spreading through her body, so she's having trouble getting the lighter to work. One of the infected stops in front of her and slowly approaches her. In a nightmarish scene, the infected gives Tess a juicy fungal kiss. Tess's hands are trembling and she's struggling with her motor skills, which is one of the main symptoms of infection. She finally gets the lighter to work and she drops it on the ground. We cut to the outside of the building as Joel and Ellie are running away and the entire building goes up in flames. Tess goes out like a fucking badass. The episode ends with Ellie standing alone, processing the magnitude of the situation. We learned earlier in the episode that she's 14, but she's going to have to grow up fast. So what were your thoughts on that ending scene and just thoughts on the episode in general, man?
I think this scene really hammered home the idea that when this type of show hits, new friends don't last long.
Yeah.
I think there are going to be a lot of situations here, and I know Joel and Tess had a history, but I think this will not be the last character we see come in for a couple episodes and dip out for one reason or another. They got a long road ahead of them. I think that this raises the stakes and ramps everything up a little bit. But the video game's only two characters. Like, there are two main characters, central characters, so you know that, like, those are the two you're going to be able to count on. And I think we first start to see this kickoff, and we're going to see how that bond goes from there, because they definitely got to become closer, because, I'm not sure you can handle a whole season with the tension being like this high between them, as far as just, like, they don't seem to like each other a whole lot. But at least Joel doesn't seem to like Ellie a whole lot, or won't let himself admit that he does. So I think we'll see him soften the edges up a little bit. But, I'm hyped that we're going to get one episode closer to a little Nick Offerman experience here. We know a little bit more about cordyceps. Still a little bit of mystery there, but we're gaining knowledge each time. And kind of like, there's actually a Stephen King book that got adapted to a miniseries that actually reminded me a lot of this, The Stand. There's like this apocalyptic type deal. The goal is to journey west to find something. So, much like Good Will Hunting, we are leaving Boston and heading west, baby. How do you like them apples?
Heading west, baby. And yeah, I think one thing you had just mentioned, Tess's sacrifice, maybe that's a thing that finally gets Joel to soften up towards Ellie, because Tess was really about it, and she was very, very focused the entire time. And badass character, sad that she can't be in it anymore, but she was a little bit overpowered, to be honest. Just super fast on her feet. Joel had the better gun skills, but that's because Joel has that army experience. It almost seems like Tess just picked up this shit just throughout. But her ability to strategize is quite incredible. So now Joel and Ellie are going to have to figure things out on their own. And we will see what's up in episode 3. We got to wait for Nick Offerman. I'm very excited for that to happen. But anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like I said, we're going to try to get episode 1 re-uploaded, but episode 3 will be out next week after it premieres on HBO, and we'll do a recap of that. So catch y'all later.